The problem with most agreements is that you don't see them. They just are. Most often, you aren't aware that what is happening around you is based on an agreement that you could potentially change. It seems that life is just that way. Working on topics such as energy efficiency, poverty reduction, sustainable agriculture, or healthcare, you are engaging in a set of agreements and relationships, whether you realize it or not. Decades of attempts to shift complex problems within those fields using agreements rooted in scarcity-driven competition have proven to be unsuccessful. Ecosynomics, the social science of abundance, offers a robust framework that takes what we have learned in scarcity-based agreements, framed by economics, and puts it within the much broader, much healthier context of abundance-based agreements. Thus, Ecosynomics allows you to understand the foundation of collaboration in your relationships. Responding to the ever-stronger demand to learn about those abundance-based approaches in the field of sustainability, the Institute for Strategic Clarity, together with the University for Sustainable Development in Eberswalde, hosted the first Ecosynomics Forum, focusing on change systems for sustainability. The forum highlighted emerging approaches for taking on agreements that support change on a very large scale. This innovation in human agreements is a phenomenon which Ecosynomics, the science of abundance, seeks to explain and highlight. We are very happy to welcome our guests, Steve Waddell, Principal of NetworkingAction and Lead Steward for the Ecosystem Labs, as well as Petra Kuenkel, a full member of the Club of Rome and Executive Director of the Collective Leadership Institute.
Just a little bit about myself, first of all. I am not an academic. I don't think of myself as an academic. My major identity actually is around community organizing. And so as a community organizer, I've done a lot of different things. I worked for a labor movement in Canada, for credit unions. I then went into, in the 90s, looking at multi-stakeholder collaborations, at that time intersectoral collaborations. In 1999, Kofi Annan, then Secretary General at the UN, was putting out a report I was asked to make a modest contribution to. And it was formative in me thinking about these global networks that I worked on for a decade. And the last 4 or 5 years, I've been much more categorically focused upon questions about systemic transformation. So this project grew out of that with a group that I've been leading the development of, called the Energy Lab, Energy Ecosystem Lab. So I'm interested in developing a number of labs around the concept of ecosystems. And what I mean by this is the situation in which organizations find themselves that are struggling to realize sustainability. And why, how can we help this system from an ecosystem, thinking of ecosystems as organizations, what can we do to support the environment in which organizations find themselves to be much more supportive of moving towards sustainability? And we know there's lots of norms, there's lots of institutional rules, there's lots of institutional structures that are inhibiting that. So that's the big question we have. We've had this one project around energy, and I'm very interested, if you have any interest in these ideas and following it through. We are also talking with the International Sustainable Agriculture Program. We have somebody that's connected to the UN Global Compact. They're very interested in this lab concept too, and we're hopefully going to be doing something with them in the next couple of months. But you can see that this can be a concept that's applicable to many arenas. And I believe that what we've developed that I'm going to share with you this morning, although it's around electricity, that it's a concept that is around asking the question about change that can be applied to, I think, any major issue. So This is the way I think of the basic setting of our work. It's around the big challenges, and by big we mean about breadth, that there's lots and lots of people and lots of organizations involved. I work often on a global level, but it doesn't have to be global. Obviously, you can have a lot of different geographic structures to be able to have that component. But I'm particularly interested in this question of depth, of transformation. So dealing with basic shifts in mindsets and logics. I use the word logics a lot in my work. Always these questions are driven by the basic question I have that is throughout all of my work, which is how can we narrow the gap between our highest aspirations and what we're producing. So I think of that both at an individual level, an organizational level, and a societal level. And my work generally deals with the societal rather than the organizational. My first book you might find interesting is Societal Learning and Change, and looking at how we bring about change at that societal level. Yes, Christoph has a copy over here. So this is the particular case. The question here is, as I explained, how can the operating enabling environment be changed? So this is of particular interest, say, for the utility sector. How can we, if we are utilities that have an aspiration, electric utility, that have an aspiration to truly move towards sustainability, it's not simply about us creating a new business model. It's about how can we create an environment, an enabling environment from the political perspective, an operating environment from a business perspective that will be more supportive of that aspiration that we're holding seriously. So the project question was about this concept of change system, distinguishing it from the production system. And for me, this was a big insight, and it might be for you as well, being able to actually distinguish between these two different types of systems. I think that it gives insight which leads to different types of action. So that's why I'm interested in it as an insight. So we did this first part, which is what I'm basically going to present to you. There was an action research component of it too. We brought together people from utilities, from different change initiatives that I'll explain, to be able to develop the model. So that was an action research component. But we're now moving into a phase of actually applying this model to different situations. We have hopefully something with ICLEI, which is the global network of municipalities in India, and applying it to a municipality in India. And there's also something called the Renewable Energy 100 campaign, and we're hoping to be able to apply it in that way too, to help their campaign develop. So let's get into these basic conversation about what the distinction is between production system and change system, first of all. So this is the way that you can model the production system. So it's about inputs, and outputs. So the input, we started with the generation of electricity. In this project, we did not concern ourselves with either transportation or what goes into the actual generation of electricity. So we weren't talking about the coal industry or the oil industry. We were talking about it from the utility and the electricity generation through to the consumption. So we can see that what's happening here is that this is sort of the traditional electricity system, and then we have this other part that's developing, the renewable energy electricity generation that's developing in response to concerns about sustainability. So that's what I mean by the production system. It's the actions, the competencies, the organizations that are involved in the production of the electricity. And this is what I mean by the change system. It's the organizations, the initiatives, I will use that word, so keep that in mind, change initiatives, that are involved in trying to integrate sustainability concerns into the production system. So these are distinctive based upon their competencies. For the production system, you need to be able to have managerial competencies, engineering competencies, for being able to produce the electricity and deliver it, etc. In the change system, you have to, as you know, very different competencies. It's dealing with change. How do we bring together people and institutions to be able to realize change? In the engineering, the production system, you have a very different group of stakeholders. You have mainly utilities, etc. And in this system, you have a very big range of stakeholders. And of course, as all systems are, they're driven by different goals and purposes, right? The one is about the production of electricity, the other is about changing the electricity system. So I think that these two systems are quite distinctive, and there is a lot of power that can come from that understanding. But nevertheless, they are very close, and they have to be close to be able to interact successfully. So there's a lot of work that's been done on bridging organizations, for example, so you can think of the bridging organization literature as being relevant to all of this. But I use the double helix of the DNA to describe them visually. So they're intertwined, there have to be lots of connections, but they are distinct. They have different strands that they're working on. So this is another picture of what I mean by the change system. This is the product of a web crawl. Does anyone know what a web crawl is? Okay, so you know in a website there are hyperlinks, and those hyperlinks sometimes point to external websites, to other organizations. So this is a methodology that maps the relationships, those hyperlinks that point to external organizations, and shows these relationships. Now, you can't see them very well, but there are actually arrows going between these organizations, and that's why they appear on this map. So this is one way to visually present and map the change system for electricity. So you can see the mapping methodology actually, and this is all done by a program. It's not as though I'm determining where the location is of these different nodes, network nodes, but the program places those organizations which have the closest ties, and that means that they have the hyperlinks pointing to each other in distinct neighborhoods, if you want to think of it that way. So that's very interesting because it gives you an understanding of the natural structure of this change system, how they think of themselves. So you can see that there's a whole group of organizations up here that think of themselves as being focused upon changing market institutions and, dealing with business models, dealing with finance, etc. So, for example, the United Nations Environmental Finance Organization, Shell, as a company is here, Ceres, which is one of the major organizations for measuring corporate performance is here. So this is the type of organization that's up here, the Carbon Disclosure Project, et cetera, those that are focused upon the behavior of organizations and markets. Over here you have the organizations that naturally come at the whole issue from a sustainability perspective, from an environmental sustainability perspective. So you have the Natural Resources Defense Coalition based in the US. You have SCI International, the Stockholm Environmental Institute up here. Stockholm Resilience, et cetera, other ones you would probably recognize. This was I was quite interested in because I didn't expect it to show up, and there's enough organizations now that are focused upon the question of energy efficiency that it shows up as a discrete type of group of organizations. Super Efficient being one of them, CLASP, which is around setting standards for energy efficiency globally, etc. Down here you have what I call the governors. So that means the NGOs, et cetera, like the World Bank is down here, the UNEP is here, the UNFCCC is here. I should have mentioned at the beginning that our focus is on the global electricity change system. So that might sound like why, and in fact I have many people say to me, why are you focusing upon global? That seems, number one, it's not the most important because national is usually the one that's most important in terms of changing energy. Number two, why don't you have a bit lower aspirations about this and maybe think about something more local? And what I found over the years in my work is that it's, number one, it's an increasingly a global environment that is setting the framework for how change can occur. You know, global markets, globalization, global ideas, global technology, etc. So I've been continually frustrated at starting at too small of a level when that level is being continually influenced by higher levels of analysis. So number one, I'm naturally have led in the last 15 or so years to the global concept. Number two, it's a bit counterintuitive, but the global level is actually an easier, in some ways, level of analysis to look at because there aren't that many organizations. This web crawl methodology has two manifestations in terms of outputs. One is this type of map. A second is a list of the organizations and the websites. So there's, this map is accompanied by a list of 213 websites. This map doesn't have all of those websites on here, but you can get something that's manageable nevertheless. So our focus was on global from the perspective that the change initiative had to have a global orientation, so something working just at a national level was not part of our sample population. And number two, it had to be part of a network. So one organization, like one company, was not the focus of our sample, with the reasoning that one organization, no matter how big, is not going to have an influence really at the global level. Now that includes all of the UN agencies, for example. The UN agencies are network organizations, right? They're networks of government. So it includes all of the UN agencies. It includes the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and they have a big electricities program, and all of its members, therefore. So there is some way that almost any actor in the world that has any significant role will be part of one of these networks we looked at. So the Climate Action Network, for example, which is made up of NGOs from around the world working on climate change concerns. And just to explain the background there. So the governors, down here we have renewables. So these are the organizations that are particularly focused upon the development of renewable technology. Over here we have what I call the advocates. So we have climatenetwork.org, so the Climate Action Network that I just referred to. So it gives you sort of a feeling like, okay, this is a manageable, it is manageable to talk about the global change sphere, and it actually has a structure. So this is what we wanted to get into more of. What is the structure of these types of change networks? So this is interesting in terms of issues, but it didn't lead me or our team to any particular insights about how we would change action or what the action would be that would come out of it. So then this is what we were particularly interested in from a systems point of view, is how to move from this current state where we have a lot of initiatives. You know, we're at a different stage of development today than we were in 1990. And yet we continue to act today as though it was 1990, in my humble opinion. We continue to start new initiatives, when the challenge is not so much about starting new initiatives, but how to get the ones that we've currently got working more effectively. So this is sort of what the picture we have of the current state of the initiatives. There's some combination, some connections, of course, but they're very under-organized, to use a word that Dave Brown used in some of his work from the 1980s. This is related to Trist's work. If you're just interested, I'm giving you a few citations here because knowing you have an academic background. Trist wrote about under-organized systems and under-organized domains, issue domains. In 1983, he put out a great work. Dave Brown wrote about under-organized systems. He was a student of Trist, and I worked closely with Dave Brown for several years. And this is what we want to be able to have, a more functional, more effective system. Thank you. So we looked at all of these networks and said, what are they doing? Why do we have so many different networks? So we found out, when we looked at them closely, we concluded that they're actually doing 5 different things. Some are focused upon the policy system, which is where a lot of our minds go. How do we change global policy? Some were focused upon technology. How do we develop new energy efficient or green technology? Some upon the finance system. How do we shift the way that the finance system is functioning so that we get them to invest in the new technologies instead of the old ones? Some upon the consumption system. How do we change consumers' behavior so that they are more sensitive to their implications of their decisions? And some on the service provider. So this is the utilities, right? This is the new business. This is the business model question for utilities that would come in here, and all of the new renewable energy organizations that are developing. And then we said, so if we have those 5 systems, what do we know about systems that they do change systems when they are going to be effective? And if you look at the functional perspective in the academic literature, we concluded that there are 7 different things that each of these systems have to do well to be able to be really effective systems. They have to do something about visioning or purposing. They have to have something about a shared sense of direction. They have to have something about organizing. So all of these that we were looking at were network organizations. So of course they were organizing, they were aggregating voice and concerns so that they could be aggregated in a way that could be effective. And you have to have that happening in a system. Certifying, measuring, we need to have some sort of indications of how we're doing and where we're going and how to move along. Learning capacity, we need to know how to, what's the latest knowledge, how to share that knowledge across the systems, etc. Prototyping, let's try something new. It's not just about, thinking of something new, it's actually trying it. And advocating. Advocates bring energy into it so that it's a change system. Without that energy for saying things have got to change, it'll be very flat. How do we ensure that there's energy in that advocacy energy in each of these subsystems? And mobilization of resources. How are we going to finance these change systems? How are we going to ensure that they have the competencies and the skills that are necessary for each of these to be effective? So this sounds like a lot and of complicated ideas, but you can actually then apply this to each organization. So each of those dots on that matrix, you can apply it to. So I worked with the World Bank, and we developed for them what we call the change profile. So each of these organizations, you can develop a change profile for these systems to understand what they are doing in the change system. So when I sat down with the World Bank people, they said, oh, well, we're doing, and I explained the model, they said, oh, well, we're doing everything. And I said, well, let's take a bit of a closer look, and probably you're not, and if you are, you're probably going to want to say we should stop doing something because there's some things we probably aren't. It's not our competency. Why would we be doing everything if it's not our competency? And the World Bank, no one's going to suggest, well, I think that they're competent at doing everything. So looking at it here, the green highlighted area, this is in the policy subsystem, right? So this is the policy subsystem, and this is the 7 functions that we talked about. So what are they really doing in that policy subsystem? Well, they're really doing these 3 things. They have a little bit of stuff happening down here, but they would say that's not our active, that's not really what we're our core competency or what we're really focused on. And they've simply accepted, they've been participating in, but they've accepted the Sustainable Energy for All. Do people know Sustainable Energy for All? So Sustainable Energy for All is an organization that grew out of the ashes of the Kyoto process. So the intergovernmental agencies under the leadership of the Secretary General of the UN said, we've got to continue doing something in this area. Obviously, the Kyoto process has not worked. And so maybe if we do something that's more about loose collaboration or bringing focus upon some issues, that would be a better way to go about this. So there's something called the Sustainable Energy for All that has formed. It's a multi-stakeholder coalition, it's framed as, around 3 goals. One's around renewable energy, one's around energy efficiency, and one's around providing access to energy. So just as a little parenthesis here, this actually shows how issues transcend one another, right? Because the key, and with transcendence being such a critical concept in large system change and transformation. So transcending is incorporating, but going beyond, right? It's not saying something was just wrong. So this is an example of incorporating the Kyoto goals, but going beyond them, because Kyoto was focused upon the industrialized nations and it was focused upon emissions questions, right? So this is focused upon, and the major problem for the southern countries, or the less developed countries, however you want to frame it, is that they were not having sufficient access to energy, right? There's millions of people still that don't have, hundreds of millions that still don't have access to energy. So the sustainable energy for all has incorporated that goal as their goal, and it's a much more, it's a transcendent goal because they've also included the Kyoto goals. So it's much more powerful. So we went through this with the World Bank for each of the subsystems. You can see in the consumption subsystem, there's only one thing they're really doing. For them, it helps them say strategically, well, maybe we shouldn't be doing this if this isn't core to what we're doing. Maybe we should just make sure it's being done or somebody else is doing it. So you can see that there's a great variety and clarity that emerges from the application of this particular methodology. So this is what we have in the end, what we're calling, it should be the systemic change matrix, excuse me, whoops. Somebody's unhappy. Catch it. So it combines the 5 subsystems and the 7 functions. So it's quite a reasonable tool. So what we did was brought together people who were from change initiatives like the Carbon Disclosure Project, like ICLEI, this global network of local communities that are working on these issues. And we simply got them to put down on Post-it notes what are their names of their programs, and then come up on the wall and put their Post-it note on where they were actually, their program fit. Many programs were in more than one of these. There's no rule about you have to be in one box, you know. But then they stood back from it and they could see that there were some gaps. And so that raised conversation about, well, if we need some visioning to happen in consumption, who's doing that? Is there somebody doing that we don't know about? Or is there some way that we should be ensuring that's happening? They found that there was some overlap in what they were doing. There were 2 initiatives doing global renewable energy 100 campaigns, and they didn't know each other. I mean, that just seemed incredible to me. And so they started saying, well, let's get together then. So that type of thing arose out of it. There were synergies where people could see that, oh, you're doing that and I'm doing this, and if we work together, there would be a much more effective way of us being able to learn and share what we're doing. So it brought up this idea of coherence, how to realize coherence, which was that one show that I gave you, that one slide I showed you. So they also concluded that it could be used in a wide variety of ways of bringing up this question of coherence. You know, it can be applied at any level of analysis, so we're applying it at a local level. In a municipality, we're proposing in India. ICLEI said that they would like to apply it to their organization to get a better understanding of what they're doing and how it fit together, and find out who else they should be working with, where their synergies were. By function, you can do the measurement function. You know, how is measuring happening across the system? And that's particularly important for the World Bank because it stepped forward and said, we're going to be the measurement hub for the world on this issue. By subsystem, so you could look at just the policy system. Is that an effective system that's emerging, or is there some gap in what's being emerging? Or by particular cell, you can look at measurement in the finance subsystem, for example. So there's lots of ways to apply this particular model. And there's a relatively easy methodology for this. What we are, so this is where we are with it right now. It's not saying this is the only methodology, whatever, but having some sort of preparation about understanding what this matrix looks like with the audience you're convening. Then having a 2-day action planning meeting where there would be the participative analysis. You know, you would be supported by, so the individuals in the meeting are not going to be the whole system, right? But they're going to but they can get up and do their piece. The background preparatory knowledge could be there for answering some questions for those that are not in the meeting. But identification of potential coherence, where can we, how can we act differently? Action plans coming out of that. Well, let's connect then, let's combine our resources, or let's figure out what to do to be able to fill that gap. And this might support an ongoing forum. So this has big implications for something like, I would suggest, C for All and the way we organize what I call global action networks. You could see that C for All could very easily organize itself around these 5 subsystems. And the goal, I want to stress, is not coordination, right? These systems are way too big for coordination. Coordination's at a task level where there's a very clear, complicated goal that you're trying to achieve, but it's not appropriate for these types of complex issues. This is about coherence. And at the meetings, it's not about saying you've got to get together. It's about having the space and creating the meeting is the intervention for people to understand the systemic change system that they're collectively developing, and to develop accountability for the health of that change system and the effectiveness of the change system, as well as their own initiatives, own goals and aspirations. Because today, people are working in terms of their own organizational goals and their own change initiative. But they're doing it without a good understanding, generally speaking, of or sufficiently good understanding of the change system to make the change system effective and have that as a key guiding force in their own initiatives work. So, thank you.
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Great. Despite there may be a bit of a time challenge, I just want to challenge you a little bit and just take 1 minute or two, turn to your neighbor and think about the following question. From your experience, when was collaboration with other people, could be personal, could be private, could be business, could be professional, could be at the university, when was it fun, invigorating, really like cool? Take 1 minute, turn to your neighbor, and then I'm going to ask you for just one sentence. Impolite interrupting you again. I just would like to pick up just a few ideas, make it short, 1 word or 1 sentence. When was it fun? When was it invigorating? Okay, in the sandbox.
When action was required.
Urgency.
Yeah.
Personal involvement instead of just subject.
Okay, so emotional, also emotional involvement. Okay.
When there was trust.
Trust.
You said when we listen to each other and we want to contribute.
Okay. Contribution, listening. Anything else? Okay, so also a sense of kind of urgency. Anything else?
If there's a new challenge, that was for me.
Okay. Okay. Okay, let's keep that in mind, because I think it was great the way Steve showed, what is a big change system, and that change system needs to turn into a collaboration system. Not everybody needs to work with everybody, of course, but in order for people to collaborate towards a certain joint outcome, there need to be this invigorating atmosphere. Does anybody have you ever been exposed to an interministerial working group? Anybody has ever been? Yeah? So, does it have this invigorating feel to it?
No.
Okay. Okay. So there is collaboration, and yeah, my presentation is about. I'm passionate about collaboration that works, and I know collaboration works between different stakeholders if these different elements that you've mentioned are present. And I would like to go back to what Christoph said. You talked about nomos. It's quite interesting. I didn't hear the word for, I think, 20 or 25 years. So it's quite interesting to hear it again. But what I'm developing is a learning approach, how we can get this invigorating atmosphere into our collaboration and yet at the same time be rational about the outcomes and be realistic and viable about the outcomes. So that's why I call it the collective leadership approach as a fractal to large systems change. Just a few words about the Collective Leadership Institute in Potsdam, where the PIC is and where the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies is. We are also in Potsdam. We're a small organization with around 17 people, a non-profit organization, a German Verein, gemeinnütziger Verein, and we are a typical income-generating NGO. We have to make our own money with EU projects, with education programs. One program is the Young Leaders for Sustainability program, and Katrin sitting here, one of our alumni. We're doing this globally, like about 40% of our, close to 50% of our income are education programs around collaboration, making stakeholder collaboration work. And we also do advisory services. So we have about 1,700 alumni from very different countries and work in open programs, tailored programs, and in what we call process integrated capacity building. And we also have an online learning space that you can check on the internet. And I've been particularly, and some of us, but these are kind of particularly my references, involved in global or international, but sometimes also local, stakeholder collaboration initiatives that had certain topics. That could be water, that could be standards, that could be sustainable coffee, sustainable cocoa, sustainable textiles, etc. And I can promise you it wasn't easy, but it was also fun. So I'd like to go back to, some of you may know this. Anybody from Potsdam here? Only one from Potsdam. I found these murals in one of the old GDR buildings. Absolutely fascinating, with a quote from Marx in mosaic stones. So I just thought this is a good opportunity. So obviously, if you think about large systems change, that quote from Einstein is valid. So any sustainability challenges that we're dealing with, they are actually a result of a fragmented way of thinking. And what Steve suggests is also to say, can we take it one level up and kind of defragment the thinking so that we can defragment the action? In my experience, I've, let's say, seen that most of the complex challenges that we're dealing with, energy systems are one, sustainability standards are something else, sustainable forestry is something else, have certain features: complexity, interdependence, and urgency. And that is a big challenge because let's say the traditional reaction to complexity is not to create such a web crawl as Steve. Steve is good at enduring complexity, but the traditional approach to complexity is please reduce complexity, coordinate, control, and put things into boxes, or kind of go towards some simplification. So in a way, we all have kind of increase our ability to suffer through, to suffer through complexity. And so the answer to complexity is definitely not simplification. It is complexity. So we need a complex approach. There's just no way out. But can we kind of live with that complex approach? And can it be a patterned approach? Is it me or is it?
It's not you. I'm afraid I have to intervene and change the resolution of the computer. This will take half a minute.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm just keep talking. So the answer to complexity is a patterned approach, and I think the web crawl that you showed was quite a good example of how we can avoid going into coordination. That's also what you said, but into seeing what are the patterns that are already available, and look what are the patterns that work, and what are the patterns that actually don't work, and then start it from there. The answer to interdependence, of course, is a networked approach. And that is also, I think, was quite visible in your presentation and in the work that Steve is doing. And the answer to urgency is tapping into the human heart. And I found it quite interesting that some of you said, you know, if I'm personally involved, if there is something emotionally enticing. So it is tapping into the human heart. And that would be my question to Steve. If you look at the web crawl and the big change system, what gets people going? So what's the issue that they get up in the morning and say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to contribute. I'm sure I can make a difference. I can't make the difference by myself. I need to get other people into collaboration to make a difference. So all three approaches require well-functioning collaboration among a wide range of stakeholders, institutions, and they all come from different walks of life. But in my experience in multi-stakeholder processes, it took sometimes 3 or 4 meetings over a period of one year that I would be talking to Steve, although like he's coming from Greenpeace, and you can even look how he's his clothes, and I'm normally not talking to this person, and then after 3 meetings I think actually he's a nice guy. So, and that takes time. It also requires checks and balances. When we talk about collaboration, we not necessarily go very far with what is theoretically right, and that's why I mentioned the interministerial working group. There's lots of collaboration around. We do collaborate, but do we collaborate in a way that gets us going and gets us going faster to better solutions? And it needs to be built, in my view, on human competence, not on the deficits, but on what is already there. So it's also about discovering what we actually can do, what we already know, and build on that competence. This is what the collective leadership compass is about, and is a compass that is derived from about now 20 years of working in multi-stakeholder collaboration, and from identifying what we kind of in our traditional thinking would call success factors, that are factors, if they are present, then there is a higher likelihood that in the middle of that room is an invigorating energy and people start contributing. Sometimes that can be as little as people who had been fighting during a meeting because they have so absolutely different opinions on how to go forward, finally, towards the end of the meeting, say, but I've got an idea, and I also know so-and-so, and they can also contribute, and you start feeling that shift in energy when people start collaborating. So why this is important, it isn't just kind of another workshop method or something that we need to learn to kind of be more harmonious, because multi-stakeholder collaboration is not about harmony. It is about kind of navigating differences into a progress that is in the end better for all, but there will be very, very different opinions of how to get there. In my view, it is extremely important that we see, if we think about change systems and we think about collaboration systems, that we redefine leadership into the capacity of a collective to actually work towards change and jointly work towards change. The collective leadership compass has 6 dimensions, and it is a diagnosis tool, it is a process methodology, and it focuses on invigorating and kind of an invigorating effect on a group of people or a group of institutions, but institutions are made up of people, and there are always people involved. It is you can say, a fractal of the competence that actually needs to happen in a collaboration system. Are you familiar with the term fractal? Yeah, more or less. A fractal, let me just kind of make it in a nutshell. A fractal is, self-similarity of systems? Probably you're familiar with that. So it means that if I create a good collaboration system between 5 people from 5 different organizations, it will have an effect of how the institutions will work with each other, and it will have an effect on how even other people who are not part of the 5 people will work together. So I can also say, if I want a large collaboration system like the change system you showed, if I want to help them work together in a different way, I can start with small fractals of better collaboration ecosystems in different places, and that will have an effect how the system will work together in the end. So I'd like to, there are derived from 20 years experience, but also from quite a bit of research in systems theory, complexity theory, quantum physics, living systems theory, not forestry management, I must admit, but a lot of development cooperation and also leadership development, and cross-checked with the multi-stakeholder collaboration settings that I've been working in. It's clear that we need to attend to the joint presence of certain dimensions. And I'm just going to skip this. And we need to pay attention to the presence of all these 6 dimensions in order to get going. And this is just an example from one of our workshops where it is about developing from a fragmented, we call it a fragmented ecosystem where people do not collaborate, into a collaborative ecosystem. And it starts with who we are. The me stands for who are we to intervene into a certain system. It's about preparing for collaboration, formalizing collaboration, implementing and evaluating, and then scaling up. And in all these different phases, we need to attend to the 6 dimensions of the collective leadership compass. So it can be used for strengthening individual leadership competence, but also for a team, for an organization, for a collaboration system. But you could also look with the compass at a large systems change like the electricity change system, or we are currently working in Tunisia in water development, etc. And it is about invigorating, bringing in that invigorating energy and the higher level of self-organization. Just quickly going through the different dimensions. It is the 6 dimensions are future possibilities, engagement, innovation, humanity, collective intelligence, and wholeness. And if I stay there, then each of the dimensions has 3 aspects, and the 3 aspects have 3 descriptions. So there's quite a bit of possibility also to locate myself, because what future possibilities means on my individual leadership may be something entirely different what it means if I talk about an energy change system. So, but it is still the same principles of future, you called it visioning, the future possibilities must come in. Future orientation can be an attitude, but it can also be a very, very clear procedural process to turn towards the future. Empowerment can also be an attitude, a personal attitude, but it also has a kind of the aspect of self-organization and democratic processes. And decisiveness is important as an element of focus, but also of in large systems of monitoring. Engagement is something we talk about definitely when we talk about collaboration. It's about how to get people on board. There are systematic processes. We've developed one. I'm sure there are many others. They are also kind of known in the world. Connectivity is extremely important, because that was an interesting element that you mentioned. The moment people came together, and the fact that you created a space you created a possibility for a connectivity that wasn't there before. And even if people had been searching the internet, probably they wouldn't have found each other. It is the extremely important success factor is collective action. I think that was mentioned here. If you get things done together, even if it's small, tiny things, then that gets people to collaborate further, because everybody wants to see results. We are, in a way, we thrive on achievement, even if it's small. But if the achievement is a joint achievement, it's just a much better feeling for most people. Innovation has the aspect of creativity. That the question is, how do we bring in a different quality of interaction in terms of bringing in new ideas that haven't been there before? Very difficult in interministerial working groups. And excellence shouldn't be underestimated, because it's about mastery. It's about also making sure, if I don't have the knowledge, do I need to bring somebody in who has a better knowledge on a certain issue? And agility refers to venturing into the unknown, to risk-taking, and to be able to learn from crises and actually turn crises into opportunities. Humanity is a broad term, and I was wondering, was it in the Young Leaders program? Somebody said, but actually humanity should be at the center. Yeah, that's right. Yes, and it is. I've developed it as one dimension.
It's the basis.
It is the basis in a way. Yeah. So mindfulness is extremely important. It's again a personal issue, but it's also you can have awareness of who else is in the room and how they, or who else is in the change system and how they act. Balance is certainly underestimated in most of our work-life non-existing balances, maybe with you, but in my generation. But it is also like, how do we balance in multi-stakeholder collaboration task and content with process or with encounter and human-to-human relationships. Empathy is clear as the ability to step into the shoes of others. Collective intelligence has the aspects of dialogue equality, and that is our ability to be in a conversation, and that may be here in the room, but it may also be virtually, or that may be through, even IT-based conversations. But it is I think that was, you were saying, listening. Like if people feel listened to, it is a very, very important element that needs to come in. Diversity is not just simply gender diversity or race diversity, but it's the question, how do we bring in deliberately different perspectives? We're trying this at the moment with, it was mentioned that we just kind of created a new initiative that's called the Potsdam Initiative, where we want to bring in people who are in large systems transformation and systems thinking, but come from very different schools of thought. It's not easy, but it's about bringing in that diversity. Iterative learning is, what are the cycles of learning that we actually bring in? And wholeness is about contextuality. That would be if I was in Steve's large electricity change system, I would be deliberately saying what's me in the context that I'm acting in, and how do I actually need to relate to other actors. It's about mutual support. Our young leader is it's about mutual support, because that is a very, very crucial point in accelerating collaboration. The moment in a room of people, if people get out of competition, even if they are not of the same opinion, but say, gosh, I've written a book, why don't you read that? Or, I know somebody who could actually help you. Then the energy completely changes. And contribution is also a personal aspect, but it's also a larger aspect. What's the contribution of our change system to the world, or of my organization to the change system, or of me to the system that I want to see? That is the future. Some of you may recognize that this is the compass. And we are currently in the process of developing a diagnosis and action tool around the compass that can be then used on the individual level, on the team level, on the organizational level, on the collaboration system level, but also for large systems change. And I'm in a conversation with a few young IT architects in Berlin. So it is about developing apps so that you can also use that. Use kind of locate yourself in the compass and use it and create a community of people who would then say, okay, so what does mindfulness for you mean? And how did you go about process quality, etc. So that's the future. It's a framework that integrates all systemic levels of collaborative change. It's a patterned guiding structure. It's not prescriptive action. It's a pattern guiding structure that enhances self-organization, a tool that combines rational decision-making with intuitive sense-making, a dynamic model. If you start at future possibilities, it will have an effect on wholeness and humanity. And it is an appreciative approach because it always starts with what's already there, with the competences that are already there. Thank you.
I think the main part is when we think about relationship is the idea of what is important in relationship. Look, when you live as a human being, what is the issue of living? The issue is to survive. That's what we all do. We try to survive every day. If you're going together in relationship, the first thing is, how can I use the other person to survive better? If you fall in love, the idea is if we both are together, we can survive better because we love each other. What we do, we create kids. Because kids help us to survive. The point is, if you are only in the surviving mode, there is very quick the question of conflicts. And conflicts mean that I will survive and you not. Because I will overwhelm you. I will be better than you. So the thing is, you have to think all the time is, how can I create an environment, not that I alone survive, so that I survive on somebody else. And this is only possible if I give up my being right, if I give up my thing of I'm the only one who knows what is right or wrong. No, I have no idea. The issue is, what is my purpose in my life? And my purpose in my life is to be together with somebody to contribute to the world, and that creates sustainability.
I think it's important to achieve sustainability in collaboration because you need the most impact you can get on this project, and for that it's important to have as many people involved and understand what you're doing as possible.
For any project, for any action, collaboration and relationship is crucial because this is where collaboration needs to happen in order to collectively achieve a shared goal. And that's why we think it's really important to create a shared understanding, a picture of what is going to be created and how relationships need to be during the action so that the project can be successful and also people enjoy collaboration and can work together towards a shared goal.
First of all, collaboration and good relationships are more fun, more efficiency and more success. Because we all deal our problems and very often we don't know that the solutions are directly around us. And just if we go in relation and start speaking with our neighbor, we find something out what can be the direct solution to our problem. What I find a little bit different is the think big thing. Behind that, it's really about changing or bringing sustainability on a big field, and I got some new ideas how to go there if I really want to do a bigger change.
So if I look to the things we heard today, the inputs, it was very inspiring to have this idea of collective leadership, you know, which is not the hierarchical stuff we always have. And in this way of thinking, you can think quite open, and you are not fixed to come to especially this result, which will lead to this action. So it's much more free, and so you can really have this level exactly the same for all. And this is what's about collaboration. Yeah. This is a very, very inspiring thing of the inputs we heard today. So collaboration and relationship is very important to achieve sustainable development, to achieve real change, fundamental change, also systematical change, not only change in the outcomes, but also change in how do you come to these outcomes. And therefore, for me, the most important thing today, the most inspirative thing, was this approach of collective leadership. So there's not one who says, this is the way, and this is the question, and now what are your answers? But you can even search together about the questions, and you're quite much more open in thinking, much more free in to handle the subjects, and therefore it's not designed to come to this one and only output, which is needed for the next step to something. So this open, free way of collective thinking, this is the stuff which really can lead to substantial change. The approaches to come to change we heard about today are quite different because they are free in the process, and they just give some methods as a framework, but real as a big, wide framework where you can be flexible and spontaneous and react to things you wouldn't have assumed before. And this is quite associative, and much more dynamic is created in these approaches. So I think you can really have some visions which really are visions, not only extrapolations from right now.
So what I found particularly interesting is that this today we were not focusing so much about on the outcomes that we expect, but more on the process. How do we get there, and how do we join our efforts, and how do we build coherence among all these different initiatives that are going on in different sectors and on different levels in different regions. And then secondly, how do we design such collaboration processes? What do we need to get people actually to collaborate constructively together, and which role do topics like trust and so on and so forth play in such processes?
Well, the presented approaches, they are first of all, you gotta obviously understand why these presented approaches are building on a sustainable platform or a sustainable foundation. And I think what these methods or these concepts present is that you gotta really have sustainable emotional and psychological and cultural identity of yourself within a group, within a functioning group, so that you have actually the possibility to achieve harmonic vibrancy. This is what they say. And the sustainability part within this is obviously that it's going to consist of a long time and build up on. And yeah, basically achieve greater things and come towards the concepts of transformation of current established systems. That would be, I think, the main. Yeah. Collaborational relationships is crucial for sustainability because it is the only way to go. That's the only thing that I can say. I mean, that's where we have to aim to. I mean, that's where we have to understand that we are one single species on this beautiful planet of ours, and that actually then obviously implies that we work together to share and to collaborate and communicate effectively to basically perform change and build upon what we know and basically, achieve some sort of a transcendency, so become beyond what we are today and be able to exist for a longer time on this beautiful planet.
What we see here is what I would call a paradigm shift, because what we have had in the Sustainable Development Agenda is measurable outcomes at short notice, quantifiable, so that you can see you actually are making progress if you're already trying to deviate from the status quo development. And here it's much more focused on the individual, on something intangible, on relationships that are happening between people, learning, all that you can't really fit into the typical categories of measurement. And this is why it is a new approach and why it creates a bit of uncertainty, and yet for me the way to go. Sustainable development or sustainability has been a challenge that goes straight against what we had as typical development patterns. So it requires breaking open old structures, breaking open old path dependencies, which creates a lot of fear, which will create losers as much as winners, because many people lose under today's system. But all these processes of transformation create resistance and are challenging to people. And this is why relationships, corporations are fundamental to make sure that we go through those transformation processes in a communicative, cordial, cooperative way to make them as little fearful and threatening and as best as possible for everyone involved.
So why is the topic of relationships so important, the topic of collaboration so important for sustainability? We can see sustainability challenges as systems failure, and many people do that. That's perfectly all right, because it's all about issues. However, it's human beings who actually drove systems to fail, and it's human beings who can make a change. So in the future of addressing sustainability challenges, it is about us being able to think together in a different way, to interact together in a different way, and to shift the way we co-create in a more conscious way. So that's why collaboration and relationship building and relationship management is not a side issue in sustainability and overcoming sustainability challenges, but it is at the core. Only if we become more aware of what we do, how we do it, how we interact, and how we actually can change the way we can make use of the human potential in thinking, in diversity, in knowledge diversity, in the way we act, etc. Only if we can make use of that potential, we actually have a chance to overcome sustainability challenges.
When I think about sustainability, the essence of it is our relationship to others, and understanding we have a different relationship with the world than what we've been traditionally having. So part of understanding and developing our understanding of relationships to the world is understanding our relationships to one another and how we impact each other by what we do, by what we're thinking about, how we act, what our desires are, etc. And we have to really explore those. And we explore those by coming together in collaborations and by exploring differences about different points of view, different values, different ways of acting, what our desires are, and deepening our understanding about the impact that my desires have upon others and about the world around us. So we really need that collective exploration process. A second concern is that we need the collective invention and intervention, because out of exploring what's possible and what our differences are, we suddenly start to understand new ways of organizing, new ways of being, new possibilities that we didn't understand before. I often use the example, for example, of the banks and how they used to think that brick and mortar, that is a physical bank building, was the way that they had to deliver new services. It was through learning about how people wanted to receive services that the banks started to deliver electronic services. Of course, there was a technology involved, but they could have done a lot more earlier with telephones if they had understood that, so that they moved away from thinking that they had to have a physical bank branch into understanding that what they're essentially people wanted was the service that the bank was to provide. Now that's just one classic commercial example, but other examples are about understanding how my desires for a very high income, for example, have an impact upon others, about how they feel about the income differentials, about the way that motivates or demotivates people. And so being able to understand those systemic relationships is something that multi-stakeholder collaborations and dialogues really facilitate the development of understanding. What I see when I look at people's actions for sustainability are they're often very comparable to what was necessary in 1990s when the issue of sustainability first came forward. The situation today is very different. It's not about creating a new sustainability initiative necessarily that we really need. What we need is for the initiatives that we have to be able to work together much more effectively. So although certainly there will be some examples of where we need new sustainability initiatives, the real imperative today is how to build sustainability change systems. So what I was really talking about today was distinguishing, number one, between a production system. So for example, I was giving the illustration of the utilities and the production of energy and electricity, and the change system. So all of those initiatives where people are wanting to integrate sustainability into the production system. Now, it's very useful to separate those two. And they're separable based upon what their goals are. One is about producing electricity, one's about integrating sustainability, about what the competencies are, one's about managing and production and engineering sciences for producing electricity, one's about change science, change process for integrating, how to integrate sustainability into the system. One is about stakeholders who are generally engineers, managers. Another is about stakeholders who are communities, governments, multi-stakeholders, consumers, etc. So they're very different systems and they should be approached differently. So what I was talking today is about how to develop a very effective change system by bringing together these many initiatives that we have. For example, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development has an electricity initiative to be able to change the electricity utilities practice. The World Economic Council or Energy Council, the World Energy Council has a series of programs about educating, about providing, sharing information across stakeholder lines. The Climate Action Network is an example of a change initiative which is focused upon integrating concerns from NGOs' perspectives into the climate or into the energy production system. So it's about how they're working together to create synergies, to be able to address gaps. Is there a collective vision? Is there sufficient measurement being done? Is there financing for these change processes? Are there sufficient prototypes? Do we really know what the new system can look like? So filling in those gaps in what we need to create an effective change system and bringing about coherence between current activities. So also developing synergies and trying to reduce some of the unnecessary duplication so that we can be much more effective in our change efforts that already exist.
In my work as an ecosynomist, I often observe that people talk about collaboration. I observe this in countries like South Africa, Turkey, Germany, on topics like social sustainability, food sustainability, sustainability in cities, etc. And what I often observe is that the projects or the people in those projects, we often only talk about collaboration because we need to talk about it. We need to embrace this concept to get money. But often if you look deep into the project, you often see that's an empty phrase because it's just, it's en vogue, it's important to do that, but people and organizations do not often have the skills and the value set to be able to really do collaboration. Often I come, yeah, we do collaboration. So do you think it's important to listen to your fellow mate of this other organization? Well, I don't think so because I think I'm right. And this is what we often observe when we talk about collaboration, when we look into collaboration, and therefore it's really crucial that we look at what is needed to really step into human collaboration to tackle challenges like sustainability. I think what we heard today, very different approaches to what's out there on sustainability. Because what we often observe in sustainability issues, it's this one stakeholder or this one interest group blaming the other. It's your fault that the water is dirty. It's your fault that the trash is not biodegradable. And I can't do anything about that. So it's always blaming the others and saying, I can't do anything. And so what we heard today is so interesting because we start, well, let's start from the assumption that you are right and I'm right, and let's find a shared purpose. Let's try to find a shared understanding and create a bigger system of change. And by overcoming the attitude of pointing at the other, but by embracing the attitude of doing something together. And this was, in my understanding, very nicely expressed in the approaches of change systems from Steve Waddell, as well as in the leadership compass for sustainability from Petra Kuenkel. Like the inner attitude as well as the competencies.
What impressed me today especially is that we were able to talk about global change and change management on a meta level. We were able to take examples from different fields of global change and think what are the patterns that enable mobilizing people, bringing people together to move towards a sustainability transition. And I think this meta-discussion and reflecting about what is actually happening among different actors and groups of actors, that's highly interesting, and we will definitely continue on this, discussion. In my view, collaboration is key to solve sustainability challenges like the climate problem, getting ahead in the energy transition. I think that we need to bring together very diverse actors and to get them collaborate in a meaningful sense. And this is not necessarily a new insight. We have been trying to do this since many years, but maybe with the raising attention at issues like climate change, there is time where people really sincerely get involved in the collaboratively thinking about solutions. And I'm optimistic about that we will achieve good results in the coming years.